This Spectre Creative video is brought to you by 1882. When time traveling, be sure to visit 1882. You won't regret it. Growing up, playing with toys, and really growing up and still collecting toys, a lot of us dream of having our very own action figure, a toy made of us. And there are services online where you can have this made for money. But if you want to have an action figure of yourself made and actually sold in toy stores, there's only really a few ways. One, you could be a brand manager, like Jesse Falcon, who got to be this elf in Lord of the Rings. Or you could be a toy sculptor, like Cornboy here, who got to be this Cornboy action figure in the McFarlane line. Well, at least that's his face. I don't think his body actually has giant guns coming out of it, but I'll check the next time I talk to him. But the safest way to have yourself made as an action figure is basically to be an action star. Because if you're in a movie with lots of explosions and lots of dinosaurs and lots of mean mobsters, there's a very good chance that this toy line is going to do very well at retail and get picked up by a toy company. And hey, there's, any number of toys that can be made of concepts like this. And well, they sell well, even if the movie doesn't always do the best. Sometimes the merchandise can sell even better than the movie, but that's a video for another time. And while Arnold Schwarzenegger has starred in many movies that get turned into action figure lines, he's not always someone who's celebrating his figure. But there are celebrities who do this. Getting an action figure made of yourself is usually a really big deal. And especially today with social media and the whole internets and all of that, a lot of stars have come out with huge approval of their toy collectibles and toy figures, especially because this helps them bond with the collector. A lot of them are collectors themselves and will even specifically make movies because they know that they're going to get toys out of that movie made of them or made of their character, and makes them excited too. Well, what about the other side of the coin? What about those actors and IP, franchises, characters that basically say, heck no, I do not want an action figure made of me? Kind of weird coming from an adult collector fan base who probably watch this channel who would love to have figures made of us. Well, let's look at some of those properties that refuse to have action figures. The first one, let's look at these guys with the same haircut from the 1960s. If you're not familiar with the Beatles, well, shame on you. But the Beatles were, and probably still are, one of the greatest bands of all time. And like many other fan bases for music groups, toy fans would love to have action figures based on the Beatles to recreate some of their favorite moments or just show their love for them. And I know what you're saying. You're like, wait a minute, Scott. I've seen Beatle action figures. In fact, I own Beatle action figures, so don't tell me they can't be made. Alright, well, I chose to start this video off with the Beatles specifically because, yes, there have been Beatle action figures and merchandise, but you'll notice something they all have in common. None of them are realistic. They're all done in sort of animated style or, some other kind of form factor that doesn't actually look like the performers. The animation looks like the animation of them. Compared to something like this, like a McFarlane John Bon Jovi action figure that looks like John Bon Jovi. This is a realistic figure actually sculpted to look like the singer and, sing on your shelf. Or, Axl Rose here, same kind of thing. It actually looks like Guns N' Roses. So what's the deal? Why is it that Guns N' Roses can have action figures made? Well, the Beatles don't want them. They said the only way we're doing merchandise is if it's in our cartoon form. We are not doing live action. All right, well, another one that comes to the top of this list is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, and one of those movies that really taught us all that this was definitely the wrong week to stop sniffing glue. And if you haven't figured it out already, I'm talking about Airplane, the mega giant comedy smash from the Zucker brothers that basically changed spoof comedy forever, and I hope and I pray every day that Hollywood does not remake this movie because it does not need to be remade. It's perfect as it is. Even if it's better off known as Flying High outside of the US, it's still Airplane and it will forever be awesome. Alright, so there's Airplane merchandise out there. You can find this on things like Etsy and even Amazon has some stuff, but it's usually not licensed. For the most part, it's just kind of craft industry, which you can see my video on the craft industry for more about how people get away with that. And, there is some cool stuff out there, and they do use the logo, whether legally or non-legally, illegally. When I was at Mattel, I really wanted to make airplane action figures on Matty Collector. My whole plan was to do them in the Mego style and give them sound clip bases, since Airplane is so well known for, quoting the movie, if you will. Well, the problem we ran into was basically a legal issue. While Airplane the movie is owned by the movie studio, they don't have rights to all of the likeness, or rather the likenesses. So doing a Airplane toy line involved not only getting the rights to do the movie from the studio, but it involved going to every single one of the actors, or in this case, many of the actors' estates, because they've passed, and getting legal permission from them to include that character. And you really can't do an Airplane toy line if you don't have the main cast. And at the end of the day, it kind of became where the squeeze wasn't worth the juice, if you will. The amount of effort that would have gone into tracking down every single one of the main actors and getting likeness rights, paying for the likeness rights, and paying for the rights to the property itself was just a lot of work for what would have been small revenue from a collector line. So we tried, but that's the story of why Airplane toys probably haven't happened. All right, DC Universe, a line that I worked on for quite a while in my time in the toy industry at multiple toy companies, Jakks, Mattel, even Jada. Now, there's some characters in the DC Universe that are not considered part of the classic part of the universe, so we didn't have access to them, like Sandman here. But there's other characters that, honestly, as the brand manager, I was not going to make. And I don't think DC or Warner Brothers was going to be keen on making them either. Specifically, a character from Shazam called Captain Nazi. And I think it's pretty obvious why you would not make this character, because he has a hate symbol right on his chest. And for YouTube, yes, this is a video about the historic character. This is not a video promoting any of these ideologies. I'm using this image just to demonstrate what the character physically looks like from a historical standpoint. Thank you, YouTube. So yeah, this character was not going to be made. But it's interesting that a toy line like Indiana Jones, and this is a character who fights Nazis on screen and, in his franchise and in the content, Hasbro had an interesting way of getting around this. When they did the German officer figures, they just left the mark off. And I think this was the right move, because you can still tell this is Vogel, and, if you wanted to customize it and repaint the armband, hey, I guess more power to you. I don't know why you do that, but hey, well, I guess to be movie accurate. It is interesting that the precursor to Hasbro's line, the Indiana Jones 5-inch line that was sold at Disneyland as part of the merchandise for the Temple of the Forbidden Eye ride, it had action figures, and one of them, the German soldier, came with the crate that held the Ark, and yeah, there's the hate symbol right there. Sold at Disneyland. Way to go, Disney! You actually sold a hate symbol in your park. I was a little surprised about this, but hey, stranger things have happened, right? All right, back to comic books. So another character that's going to have a little bit of an iffy time getting an action figure made, Cardiac. So this is the villain there you see choking Spider-Man and slamming him up against Rhino there, or maybe Rhino's just about to grab them both. Who knows? Well, Rhino does say he wants to kill him. So anyway, enough about that. Cardiac, the blue guy with the white little lightning bolts on his head, very cool character from the 90s from Marvel Comics, and one of Spider-Man's more colorful villains, or, well, frenemies. Either way, he's a Spider-Man character. So he's perfect for a Spider-Man Marvel Legends wave, right? Well, the catch is that Cardiac fell into one of those categories where the creator actually gets paid royalties when this character appears on any merchandise, t-shirt, action figure, whatever. So while the 90s have made a huge comeback as far as action figures, because, well, a lot of adult collectors were growing up in the 80s and 90s, so it makes sense to do figures of the comic books we were reading when we were kids because, nostalgia. For a character like Cardiac, he was created by Eric Larson, and Eric Larson gets a royalty on Cardiac merchandise. So the idea of doing an action figure that Hasbro is going to have to pay an additional royalty for on top of the royalty they're paying to Marvel, it's tough. Eric's, better known as the writer, the drawer, and eventually writer of Spider-Man, and the creator of my personal favorite comic book, Savage Dragon. And he was really huge in the 90s. I mean, I still think he's huge now if you're still following Savage Dragon after 29 years, but that's another story. Either way, it's another one of those squeeze juice issues where having to pay extra for a character when you have so many characters you don't have to pay extra for means it's going to be harder to see him as a character because, well, it'll cost Hasbro more money, and there's plenty of other options for them. And that's what upper management is probably going to say to marketing is, choose someone else. All right, another different story. Spaceballs, the merchandise. Why don't we see Spaceballs merchandise? I mean, come on, Spaceballs is like a space adventure. In fact, I've read online posts from fans who never even saw Star Wars and saw Spaceballs and just thought it was a great movie. But obviously it is a spoof of Star Wars and, a little bit of Star Trek and inner space and aliens. It's got, different Planet of the Apes. I could go on. And a big part of the movie is the merchandising. There actually is merchandising of Spaceballs in the movie. And in fact, there's action figures in the movie.
Lord Helmet, what? You need it on the bridge, sir. Knock on my door! Knock next time! Yes, sir.
So why don't we have these action figures, or really much merchandise at all? Much like earlier looking at things that show up on Etsy for Airplane, you do see some Spaceballs stuff showing up on the secondary market, again, mostly falling into the craft industry, which is why studios don't usually sue the pants off of individual artists selling handmade items. And some of them are pretty funny. I mean, especially this one that came out in 2020, which still cracks me up, and I'm glad I have one of these. But as far as official merchandise, well, that's a whole other issue. Because I did a whole video on this, and you can actually see the deep dive if you click on the link above. But the short version, to quote Spaceballs, is that when George Lucas allowed Mel Brooks to make Spaceballs, and I mean, Mel Brooks didn't have to get George Lucas's approval, but he wanted to because he's an upstart kind of guy. Well, Mel Brooks agreed not to make Spaceballs merchandise. But when Disney bought Star Wars, well, that handshake deal that Mel Brooks and George Lucas made didn't come with the package. There was no contract. It was just a handshake deal between Lucas and Brooks. So nowadays it's more like Disney doesn't want Spaceballs merchandise because they don't want it confused with Star Wars merchandise, and if you make Spaceballs merchandise, well, you're going to not get access to all of this IP, and people are going to choose that. All right, religious action figures, jumping to a completely different category. So while not always hanging in your local toy store or big box store, action figures based on religious texts, and specifically the Tanakh and the New Testament, tend to be bestsellers, especially at Bible stores. You'll see these always constantly selling at religious stores or in temple and church gift shops, that kind of thing. And there's been all sorts of different approaches, shall we say, to making characters based on the Bible. I mean, they're fantastic stories. And there's action, there's adventure, there's underdogs, there's, battling, and it really does have all of those toyetic qualities. Plus, there are people that love these characters. And one of the most popular action figures made from religious texts is Jesus. You will see more Jesus action figures than probably any other character from religious text. And he's been done in all sorts of ways, different articulation, different companies, different scales, different price points. Again, not something really hanging at Target or Walmart, but if you go on Amazon and type in Jesus action figure, you're going to find quite a variety of items to choose from the humorous to the serious to the articulated to my personal favorite, the enduring freedom Jesus, with a rocket launcher, which we know comes right out of the second book of Hebrews, where his apostles bring out the rocket launcher for Jesus to use. And I can't go on with this, but yeah, that actually exists. Heck, there's even been action figures of God himself, has had his own action figures. I particularly like this one because it looks like a vintage Star Wars action figure that could, hang out with Obi-Wan. So what about other religions? Well, in particular, the Quran, the holy document of the Islamic faith, the faith itself does not permit visuals of characters like Muhammad and others of their religious figures to appear as, physical or as representations. And we should respect that. And for that reason, you don't see anyone from this faith as a toy. And that's okay, because you should respect everyone's faith. And if that's what they believe, 100%. And that's why you don't see it. All right, moving into a different direction, Saturday morning funnies. Remember these when we used to actually, open up the paper and you'd see, funny cartoons and characters that you saw every week and almost kind of became like your cartoony friends because you got used to seeing them once a week. That was before the internet. Well, there has been some really fun toys made out of Sunday morning cartoon strips, and some of them have even become cultural icons into themselves, like the Garfield car sticky suction cup. Peanuts, or Snoopy and Charlie Brown, as most people also call it, even though it's officially called Peanuts, it's also been merchandised in lots and lots of ways, and some of its merchandise is quite collectible and quite valuable, going back decades and decades. Charles Schulz has been a big fan of this. Bill Walterson, though, well, a little different story. He is the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, the beloved story of young Calvin and his tiger best friend who, is he actually a stuffed animal? I guess that's up to you to decide. But he goes on imaginary adventures, or does he? Are they real? Okay, I'm going to stop with that. But it's a great comic, and if you've never read Calvin and Hobbes, it's absolutely worth picking up. It's hilarious, it's heartwarming. There you go. That's the word I'm looking for. My English is much more better. Well, Bill Walterson doesn't want merchandise made of it, specifically because he doesn't want to devalue the property, is what he said. He wants the cartoon to stand on its own, and he doesn't like the idea of merchandise overtaking the original content, kind of the way Star Wars has. Star Wars merchandise sells way better than the box office as far as money revenue for the brand. So that's his decision, and as the creator, he absolutely gets to do that. All right, a last one to talk about is this guy, Thomas Cruz. You've probably heard of him, right? He's a big movie star, and you may know him from, different things like when he did a nosedive on Oprah Winfrey's couch, or, any of the many action-adventure movies that he's done throughout his career. Personally, I'm a big fan of his appearance on South Park, even though I don't think he's a big fan of his appearance on South Park. Either way, he's mostly known as a movie star and mostly known as an action movie star, similar to how we opened this video looking at those Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and all the toys that have been made of Arnold Schwarzenegger over the years. Well, if you think about it and you look around, you will see that there has never been an action figure of Tom Cruise. In fact, his movies rarely even get merchandised. Yeah, you might see something like this, like a Top Gun mug, if you will, that is an officially licensed product. But the closest he's ever come to an action figure is this recent Top Gun Transformers crossover, which is basically just a jet plane that turns into a robot that is merchandised as, Top Gun. Well, I mean, it is the plane from Top Gun, but it is in no way Tom Cruise, even though the action figure or robot is called Maverick. I mean, that's not Tom Cruise's face, I guess, in any sense of the word. Maybe, if he, I'd say under that, but it's a robot. So, but yeah, I mean, it's not there's no likeness rights here. It's called Maverick, but it's clearly not Maverick Tom Cruise, the actor or the character. So what's the reason for this? Well, Tom Cruise's contract. If you make a movie with Mr. Cruz, he has a clause in his contract that he puts in every single movie contract that specifically says no merchandise is to be made of him. He does not want action figures of himself. It is part of his contract, and he makes sure that is in every single contract that he does. Hey, he has every right to do this, and whatever his reasons for it, he doesn't want merchandise or action figures of him to be around, whether because he's afraid kids are going to smash them or he just doesn't like looking at small versions of himself. At the end of the day, this is totally his choice, and he's got every right to do this. You can make that choice, and
it's the choice of a new generation.
So there you go, a look at action figures we just can't see. Are there any that I missed? Leave them in the comments below. Let me know if you know of different properties or actors, actresses that don't want to be seen as action figures. And I hope you enjoyed this. It's been an interesting journey through the history of unseen toys. If you like this video, do subscribe and give it a like simply because it tells YouTube to share it with more people. And this is all about sharing toy love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.